Okay, and now it's time to talk about rhetorical strategies. Okay, um, so first, what do I mean by strategy? Um, okay, so a strategy is a tactic. Okay, and most of the time they're deliberate tactics, sometimes they're unintentional, but they are tactics employed to produce a specific rhetorical effect on the audience. Um, Now, like I talked about in the last video on the rhetorical situation, we tend to find evidence of most rhetorical strategies inside the text itself. You look at the text itself and you see the rhetorical strategies that work there. Um, that's not universally true, though. Like I already talked about, there is some bleed. Sometimes you'll find strategies outside of the text. There are lots and lots and lots of different types of rhetorical strategies, and when we get to Unit 2, we're going to discuss the types of different types of strategies for textual rhetoric. We're going to talk about new strategies, different strategies for visual rhetoric, for multimodal rhetoric. But there are three big categories of rhetorical strategy that are called appeals. Ethos, pathos, and logos, all right? And these three are super, super important rhetorical terms because these are strategies that are employed by almost every single rhetorical situation in some way or another, okay? They apply across all different types of mediums. They're just in every rhetorical situation. So like your book explains, these three big rhetorical appeals were first identified and defined by Aristotle. And for some reason, your textbook, can you tell that I have some problems with your textbook? I think it's a really good textbook in general. There's a few organizational things that bug me, and this is one of them. So for some reason, your book chooses to match up these three appeals with the three parts of the rhetorical situation. Like they talk about ethos underneath the communicator, which actually makes a lot of sense. We'll talk about why. They put logos with the message and pathos with the audience. And there's some interesting connections about thinking about it this way, but I personally would not have organized your textbook this way. I wouldn't have done that because it's not how I organize these definitions. I prefer to think about these appeals as rhetorical strategies that are all aimed at the audience. And usually the way you talk about rhetorical appeals is you always talk about their effect on the audience. When we analyze rhetorical text for the presence of these appeals, we are always very much talking about how the audience is responding, how the audience is being appealed to. It's all about appealing to the audience. And then another distinction, again, is going back to just that idea that the rhetorical strategies are usually found inside the text as opposed to the rhetorical situation, which I think of as more as outside the text. But especially in the case of ethos, we'll see how that boundary isn't super firm. So let's get into them though. If you've never heard these terms before, you've got to become familiar with them quick. So let's start with ethos and what does it mean to appeal to ethos? So a way to think about how to define ethos, write this one down, is trustworthiness and credibility. And like your book points out, sometimes that sense of ethos comes from knowing about the communicator, right? So this is going to be information outside the text itself. Right, like I have some examples here. Like, take a look at the scientists, right? Those scientists, they have PhDs and they've like gone to school and they know their stuff, and so we trust them. We trust whatever it is that they're saying in their lab reports or whatever, because of who they are and because of their credentials. So that is a form of appealing to ethos, right? Their credentials. or like, for instance, take the CEO of a company, right? The CEO obviously has a lot of business experience. He has to have that position, right? So we can trust what this person says about business because they know stuff, right? They're by virtue of their position. That's a form of ethos, right? Um, However, I will say that sometimes ethos has more to do with likability than with actual credibility. Okay, so sometimes you just like a person and therefore you want to trust whatever they have to say because you like them, not because they're credible, not because they know anything. Um, so the example of this is think about celebrity endorsements, right? Does that celebrity really know anything about makeup or clothes or sports? I mean, maybe, right? Like Brad Pitt there. Maybe he does wear Chanel number 5 and really loves it, and that's what makes him such a great actor or person, or we just want to smell it. We just all want to smell like Brad Pitt. I don't know, right? Like, there's not a whole lot of logic sometimes behind celebrity endorsements, but it is absolutely an appeal to ethos, right? People love that celebrity or hate him. Sometimes it works backwards, but anyway, if that person's really likable or has that sort of aura about them where you just trust what they say or you want to do exactly what they do. If you ever see a celebrity on an ad, that is appealing to ethos. Or if you have ever been influenced by an influencer, that is a whole culture building on the appeal to ethos. Influencers. Okay, however, ethos can work from inside a text as well, right? You don't necessarily have to know anything specific about the creator. You can look at the text itself, and the text itself can sort of build some ethos. So one example of that is, say you're like reading an academic article or paper, and you see the example up there, there's tons of spelling mistakes or grammar errors, or they're not supporting their arguments or whatever, and you're just not going to trust. That's a very credible paper right there, right? Or a credible argument. On the other hand, if it's completely error-free and it has great research and it cites all of these other sources and it's been published in a reputable place and all of that looks really good, all of that builds a sense of ethos that this must be a trustworthy source, right? Um, the text itself is creating its own appeal to ethos, all right? So let's bring this back to your self-presentation projects now. How do you appeal to ethos when you present yourself to the world in whatever way? Do you set yourself up as being an expert on something? I'll say, like right now, I'm setting myself up as an expert on rhetoric. As your instructor, as your teacher, as a person qualified to teach English 101, I have set myself up as um, an authority. So you are being persuaded as my audience by that sense of my ethos. I've appealed to ethos here by setting myself up as an expert. How much can you really trust me, though? Do you know? So other strategies that you might personally employ in your life, do you make yourself seem really likable? Is there a certain target group of people that you really want to appeal to? And so you do what you can to make yourself feel really likable, like you really relate to them, right? All of that is part of maybe an appeal to ethos. So think of those. What are your strategies for appealing to ethos? Okay, let's move on to pathos. And I just realized that I never actually, here we go. There we go. That's better, right? Whatever. Okay, pathos. So a definition for pathos. The easiest shortcut way of thinking about an appeal to pathos is thinking about it as an appeal to emotions. Anything that tries to get you to feel some kind of emotion, that is an appeal to pathos, all right? So that commercial that makes you want to cry, or that meme that makes you laugh, or that that uh, that public service announcement that makes you feel guilty for doing something wrong, for throwing trash out your window, or for, I don't know, whatever it is that makes you feel guilty. The dog, there's just that little guilty face, perfect guilty face, right? Anyway, anything that's trying to get you to feel an emotion. But pathos can also be subtler than just emotion. It can be really subtle emotions first off, right? Like just sort of making you feel calm, or making you feel at peace, or making you feel sort of satisfied or happy. So very subtle emotions count, and those ones can be a lot harder to identify sometimes, um, but they still count as an appeal to pathos. Um, but it can also be, the subtlest form I feel like is when pathos is an appeal to a sense of values, um, like patriotism, or like a sense of trust or loyalty or honesty, like you've made a deal, or that like you can, yeah, like that. That might feel like we're crossing a line here to ethos, but just this idea that there's been a commitment, right? A sense of commitment, or a sense of community values. That's the service volunteers there planting trees. Our community really values these things. So it's making you feel like a good member of the community. All of that works under an appeal to pathos too. Those ones can be harder to identify, but they're still part of it. So you should still think about pathos in all of those ways. Appealing to emotions, appealing to values. And when you think about yourself, right, your projects, your genre of self-presentation, how do you try to appeal to your audience's emotions? Do you try to make your followers laugh or feel angry, right? Do you post a bunch of political stuff? Are you trying to get people riled up? Um, do you try to make people just feel happy or calm? Or what do you want people to feel when they look at you, right, as a person, when they read their stuff? Um, what, yeah, how are you, what emotions are you trying to appeal to in your audience? All right, now we come to logos. If pathos is all about appealing to emotions, logos is almost the opposite. Maybe opposite's not the correct way, but logos is about asking your audience to disengage with emotion and consider things coolly and rationally. Um, so the shortcut way to think of it is logic, logos, logic. You can see how those terms relate, but it's about appealing to that sense of reasoned calm. Um, it's about making sure that what you communicate makes sense, or at least makes sense to your intended audience, all right? Because your message doesn't necessarily have to be true. It doesn't have to be right. It doesn't have to be accurate. It can even be a logical fallacy, but as long as it makes sense to your audience, then you are still appealing to logos. Anything that might make your audience say, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense," or that's reasonable. That's reasonable right there, right? That is appealing to logos. So what that might look like, it might look like using statistics. It might look like quoting research, but it can be more subtle than that too. It can be maybe you like make comparisons, pros and cons, or you make a claim and you support it with evidence, or just honestly, as long as you simply sound really reasonable, that counts as an appeal to logos. Anytime you ask your audience to be like, let's consider this rationally, we're appealing to logos. So here's a funny note about appealing to logos. Appealing to logos is actually, maybe this is a personal opinion, but I don't think so, a terrible strategy when you're trying to persuade people to buy things. Research has shown over and over and over again that people are way more likely to spend money when they feel emotional, when they feel some sort of emotional connection, and they are far less likely to spend money when they feel rational. So if you've ever seen ads or commercials that, and I bring up car companies, and this is a really, really old cell phone ad, but just these are examples of ads that are asking their audiences to think very rationally. They're like, this car ad here. Look at all of our features. Look at how safe we are. Look at all of these great things, and it's really text heavy, and uh, like most people are just going to glaze over that ad. Now, I'm not going to say that it's not effective. There are certain types of audiences that really do respond well to logical persuasion, is what we'll call it, I guess. But look at that cell phone ad, right? They've got charts up here comparing numbers. They've got all sorts of testimonials as evidence of how great this product is. Um, Once again, they're asking you to think very rationally and to consider the ways that they're the best, which I'll emphasize works sometimes, but the vast majority of the time, don't you look at these things and your eyes just glaze over and you're like, nope. Far more effective ads are ones that appeal to pathos or ethos most of the time. I guess it depends on your type of intended audience. But now, no. All right. Moving on from that little note. To think of your own genre of self-presentation. In what ways do you try to appeal to logos? In what settings and with what audience, right? Because, like I just mentioned, an appeal to logos is not going to work in every setting or for every audience. So my guess is that this is mostly going to come up in an academic setting, right? So maybe if you're talking about your college applications, and even then, maybe your college applications were more emotional than they were logical, or you're talking about the papers that you write to impress your professors. But be creative, because it might show up in other areas of your life, with friends, with family, even on social media, maybe, I don't know. But what areas of your life do you try to get your audience to think rationally and sensibly? And if you're going to say, I post political stuff to try to get my audience to think rationally and sensibly, think again about how your audience is actually responding, okay? Because it's probably not actually how they're responding when you post political things. All right, I hope you were taking good notes. I hope now you have a better understanding of rhetorical appeals, ethos, pathos, logos. They are super important terms that we will keep talking about over and over and over again this semester, so you've got to get comfortable with them, with understanding them, with identifying them, and knowing what they are. We'll definitely be talking a lot more about them in the future. All right, that's it for now, though.